So I think this is going to be like a weird, fun session. I hope it's going to be. It's not your typical HackerCon talk. We're going to be talking about public policy, which sounds super boring, but yeah, there you go, in the back. He knows what I'm talking about. But actually, through several years of trying to fix like low-level bugs or like hack a single system or hack an entire organization, hack an industry. One of the things that we learned through Am The Cavalry is that actually it's about the same amount of work effort to hack an entire industry as it is to hack a single system. And if you want to hack a single industry, you could also hack the public policy. So this is kind of the public policy hack. How do we get better documentation? How do we get better policy statements out? So with Am The Cavalry for the last, probably 18 months or so, we've been working on building out what we're calling a cyber safety policy database. This is just like, hey, here's a bunch of cyber policies, particularly around cyber physical systems or the Internet of Things. A lot of them say similar things. Some of them say different things, but like, let's put them together and compare them. Like, wouldn't that be fun and cool? And we've done that informally in building out like our automotive 5-star cyber safety framework, as well as the Hippocratic Oath for connected medical devices. Over the last year or so, we've done it more formally, where we've went out and actually sought out policies. Some of them we helped frame and helped government agencies in the crafting of them. Some of them came out independently, but had a lot of overlap. And so, like, what if we took those and framed them up together against each other and said, how does each one map to the other one? It was just kind of a fun thing, but then we started to see it had a lot of power. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But we actually have another really cool thing that we're going to talk about today with David Rogers. So, David, I'll let you do your introduction, but just very briefly, he's done a lot to help craft IoT policy for the UK government over the last probably decade or so, and culminating most recently in a document that they launched earlier this year, talking about an IoT code of practice for security, which is going to get some more legs even than it has right now. So I want to flip it over to David to do the first part of this. I've got the code of practice up on the screen here if you want to refer to it. Hopefully my screen doesn't blink while you're talking. But yeah, take it away, David.
Cool. Well, thanks, Beau. So a little bit of background. So I've kind of had probably one foot in the security research community for quite some time. I took an unusual route, like most people, into InfoSec. Left school at 16. Ended up doing stuff I didn't want to do, and ended up as the head of security for Panasonic Mobile, and doing at 23, and doing a lot of investigating embedded systems hackers. So my background is electronic engineering, and so yeah, that's really how I cut my teeth and how I got to know a lot of people in the security research community, and I got a lot of respect for them over the years. So I've been coming here for a few years too. But for the past few years, I've also been running a company called Copper Horse, and as part of that, we've been helping the UK government with the National Cybersecurity Strategy. So we're on the second iteration of that now. So I help them out on some of the mobile and now the IoT parts of it. I also get involved in the GSMA and other industry bodies. So I chair the device security group at GSMA, and I also teach. And so what that's given me is a kind of like, there's one of my students here, by the way, one of my former students. But what it gives me is a really broad view in terms of, the whole ecosystem, what manufacturers want, what security researchers want, and hopefully, with the work that we've done, particularly around IoT security, that's been reflected. And I should say also that there's a huge team behind this work. The lead for this is the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, Department for Digital as well. And but behind that is also the National Cybersecurity Centre, who are an excellent group of individuals. There's so many good people there. I can't say enough good things about those guys. And the advantage actually that we have in the UK is that the NCSC underpins all of the government departments. So while the Department for Transport is doing some work on cybersecurity, or we're doing some work on consumer devices, or BASE is doing some work on energy systems and smart buildings, underpinning all of that, you have all of these fantastic engineers at the NCSC, and it really, really works. So, to cut to the chase, well, how did we start this work? Well, I was in the south of France at a standards body, and I sat down for coffee with a guy from the NCSC, and literally the start of this conversation was how would we have stopped Mirai? And so we came up with a kind of straw man list of things. But during that process also, we were kind of inputting what we observed, right? So we've all observed. So I've done vulnerability disclosures to vendors that have gone really, really badly. I've seen the consequences of vendors that don't have any way of talking to researchers and how badly they treat them. I've also seen at first hand, the fact that we didn't have any way to do software updates on mobile devices in the past, and having to struggle on with major security issues. But what we did see was that, there are a lot of bad practices that we all have known about for, say, the past 20 years or so, and they're still here, and people are still shipping products, particularly IoT products, that are extremely insecure. And so we kind of agreed that we really do need to tell people the basics still. We still need to tell, particularly companies that are just kind of digitizing products. So, say a washing machine company that wants to put their product on the internet, that's their prerogative. But in reality, they don't know what they're doing. And they're doing the same things that people did 20 years ago. But unfortunately, with some of the equipment that's still insecure, with the same vulnerabilities as 20 years ago, that still have open telnet access and so on. So what we wanted, these guidelines, so we came up with a code of practice in the end, and there was an expert group came together. This is all part of a report which is on secure by design, and there are many elements to this about how to communicate this to consumers and so on. But at the core of it are 13 outcome-based guidelines. So what we wanted to make these things were measurable, and we selected the top 3. So the top 3 are literally no default passwords. We're not going to accept that anymore. It seems obvious, but like I say, the products are out there. The second one is about doing vulnerability disclosure, actually having acting on it and having a /security page and so on. And the third one is about having software updates and end-of-life policies and so on. So those 3 basic things are actually also the most impactful things. So if we get those, then we're really winning, because that's the problem space at the moment. The rest is kind of really, really nice to have, but to me, they're quite essential. And I should also say that there are some vendors out there who are doing a great job, but the large part isn't. So what I've described these things as well, these top 3, so the consumer can check whether there's a default password on a device. It's pretty easy. A consumer, if they were minded to, could try and see if they could report a vulnerability to a company. And also, consumers are going to be pretty easily know whether that device can get software updates or not. They'll certainly know if they can't get software updates. So these work as kind of insecurity canaries. So in a sense, a consumer could reject a product on the basis that none of those 3 things exist. Because if those 3 things don't exist, then probably the rest of the product is pretty badly insecure as well. I think that's a good bet. So that's the way we looked at it. We've had some great conversations, Beau and I. I should give a shout out to a lot of people that I've spoken to over the years in terms of this particular topic. Don Bailey, I noticed this tweet was on the screen earlier. Don Bailey particularly was heavily involved in the GSMA IoT security guidelines, and more security researchers are coming into the business community and the government community to actually explain to people and tell it how it is. And people are listening to them. And so I'm really grateful to the fact that people bothered to listen to me. And, we've come up with what I think are a decent set of guidelines. So we've sent this out for public feedback. Public feedback was pretty good. We've made some tweaks and so on, and we're ready to publish probably later in the autumn. And together with this, and this is a happy coincidence actually. So Beau mentioned at the start that he was doing a mapping exercise against policy with the I'm the Cavalry group. And what we've done is a mapping exercise, mainly for our own efforts, to understand what's happening in the standards and guidance space. So there are a ton of people who have already worked on IoT security and are standardizing it at the moment, but it's really, really fragmented. We don't want to kind of create another standard for no reason. But what we can do is kind of say, this is what's out there and this is how it maps to the code of practice. So what I'd like to see that we do with that is that we put it out as open data, so then anybody can take that information and use it for in their own companies or whatever. But hopefully that'll help to raise the bar of security and really contribute to making things good in IoT. Okay.
Thanks. So I believe, David, correct me if I'm wrong, but that is the first public announcement that's intended to be open data, or hopefully open data, right?
Yes, yeah, it is, yeah.
So a world first here in the Cavalry track at BSides Las Vegas. Who would have thunk it? Just goes to show what a handful of dedicated, passionate people can do in this world, is put something like that together and then open it up, crowdsource it. We had a little conversation about like some of the things that can come out of it, going from here for something that is more of an open data project, which is a good transition into what we've done at Am The Cavalry over the last few months, which is to try and put together a list of, oh man, that blew up real big, nice. So a list of general policy statements that cross a lot of areas. So if you look at this list, got a lot of black screen there. I don't know what's going on with that. Always have backups, right? So if you look at the list here that we've got on the screen, I'll see if I can zoom into that a bit. But so we took a lot of the policy documents that exist, things like the DHS strategic principles for securing the Internet of Things, things like Am The Cavalry's Automotive 5-Star Framework, some of these documents that already exist out there in the field, and we said, what would happen if we just started to see how each of those map against each other, so that if we're writing a policy doc or a set of policy recommendations, we know we didn't miss anything, and we know that we've got the best possible language distilled from everything that actually exists out there in public policy land today. And what we found is that there's a ton of overlap. There's also some sector-specific documents that are really useful in that sector. So you can see right here highlighted like the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration cybersecurity best practices for modern vehicles. That's very specific, and they've got 12 policy statements where some other policies might have many fewer, like 3 policy statements. So you can see they go into a lot more detail in a very specific area. But to be able to pull these things together, to put them in a mapping system in a way that doesn't create just another standard, and there's an XKCD comic about that, as there is for everything. So how do we put it together in a way that can be mapped for policymakers, for academic researchers, for industry, and for others to be able to kind of smooth the transition, right? So I think in 2016, we did an analysis, and what were there, Josh, like 12 different policy documents on cybersecurity and IoT, just from the US government, and I think one from NISA. That's a ton. That's a lot to keep up with. And in a lot of cases, people are kind of stepping all over each other to try and get these things and understand them. And what we wanted to do as well was publish this in an open format so anybody could take it and use it. Going through this process and in having some conversations with particularly US government agencies, one of the things we learned is that they could actually use them for a lot of really interesting things. So in putting this together, we actually found that there was a reference set of statements, and I know that this is an eye chart and you can't see it all, but we came up with some reference statements that distilled each of the policies that had overlap and pulled into a single sentence. This is going to be available online very soon, so you don't have to squint to see it. We'll publish the notes and the links. A single set of reference statements that could actually just be picked up and used in a policy document if somebody wanted to, or tweaked to fit a specific industry or a specific purpose. And in talking with some of the agencies, they were like, wow, you've done this and you've already mapped it back to our internal policies and guidance and rulemaking. That's kind of cool, because then what it does for us is we don't have to go and figure out what our legal authorities are. We've already got it mapped. So we reduced the threshold to building new policies and also made the policy statements better so they could be picked up and used. They would be more consistent, so industry wouldn't have to figure out a different way of going about complying or aligning to different standards around the world or different policy statements around the world. And it gave a good data repository for academic researchers like Carl and Kareem and Ishan, who you saw yesterday, talking about some of their work, so that they could then take this open repository and mapping as a single easy data set to start jumping around and doing more deep analysis and coming out with recommendations and conclusions. So we are going to publish this. I can put just a link in the YouTube video that we've got, or distribute the link to however we want to best format it. Right now it's in a Google Sheets document, which is probably not the best database, but all the information is accurate. We've also got a Word document that has the single policy statements that we found are the superset of everything that exists, and we'll publish those as well, starting probably next week when I get some sleep. But one of the tools that I wanted to highlight, or one of the use cases, and then we'll open it up for questions with the last couple of minutes that we've got here, is if we want to see which policy buckets map to which public policy documents, we can pretty quickly and easily see that. This is just with a simple pivot table, because I suck at databases, so I used the tools I had. So you can see, like, supply chain rigor. You've got things like the DHS strategic principles for securing the Internet of Things, the Hippocratic Oath for connected medical devices. And I suspect if you plotted this on a line by timing, you could see history. You could see what documents feed into what other documents. And that could be really, really interesting to emerge trends. So you could say something like, hey, this supply chain rigor concept is getting a lot of traction. We should probably look for more policy documents on supply chain rigor in the near future. You can also use this, again, I'll zoom in on this. If you are working in an agency or working in a public policy recommendations house, like a think tank, then you can take a look at what you've got, map it to what already exists, and says, where's my coverage? So this is the top mapping. Actually, I'll zoom down here to the UK government document, the Code of Practice, so you can see where that maps up. So, David, for your use, you can see that you've got 7 overlaps with the cyber safe and secure by design. You've got 1 here with forensically sound evidence capture, and that might be an artifact of the target demographic that you're going for, is why you've got that balance, which is really interesting to look at. And it can be a check and say, oh, did we undertreat that, or did we treat it just right? It's just different than the superset. There's a lot of other things you could do with it. I know Carl and Ishan probably are thinking about some things now. But we see this as a start, right? It's a bunch of data we just want to put out there and let somebody else figure out how to use it and make best use of it. You could also use it in a former life when I was doing a bunch of governance, risk, and compliance auditing. This type of a mapping was super helpful, because you could go into a company and they would want to know, here's our program, what laws do we comply with? So this is just an easy translation engine to that, which could be an enabler of business. It could smooth over a lot of the processes that small companies have to go through. Normally they'd have to pay 6 figures to PwC to come in and figure it out, or somebody, and they could now potentially do it for free. So we think it's a cool thing. Hopefully you guys do too. I'll shut up now and take questions. got the one in the front here.
David, I love the idea of sort of a harbinger, a canary in the coal mine. Always thinking sort of unintended consequences and how wily people are in terms of meeting the requirement all of a sudden and enabling customers, and consumers. I think a lovely idea. And what was the concern about then incentivizing just fixing the hard-coded credential issue, right? And then nothing else. So you get, say, theoretically devices that no hard-coded credentials, but then fail in other ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could say it's probably largely part of the let's get rid of the password thing, but you know, I mean, the way that the code of practice is done is actually relatively high level, and we wanted to have these measurable things. And what we could see was lots and lots of IoT devices coming out with admin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and in the context of Mirai and Reaper and so on, that's exactly what the problem was, or major part of the problem. So it's not, and I think that's maybe the attitude people have taken is like, well, you know, that's an old issue, but it isn't. It's still a current issue. So yeah, there's some really complex things that we want to do, you know, in the future, like quantum safe cryptography and things like that. But actually, look over here, admin. So those basic issues still need to be addressed. And I think the bottom line is we've had enough. It's not acceptable. If you want to make the UK a safe place to do business in, we can't stand for this.
Do it.
Yeah, so going back to your idea that you were talking as an example about the refrigerator or the dishwasher or whatever, right, and putting that on the internet.
Washing machine.
The washing machine, perfect. I got it wrong already. Those devices remind me of old school networking and IT. They're a box. You design a box, you sell a box for a specific profit margin, and the team's already then moved on to building the next box, right? If I look at the most secure IoT devices today, they're the ones that charge a subscription because that gives your team a recurring profit to keep the team alive, to do security updates, etc. How would you feel about kind of allowing vendors to think about that model? I don't mind having a pennies a month subscription for my washing machine if it means my washing machine's secure, because otherwise we can't really expect them to factor 10, 20 years of warranty for security updates and IT talent into their current profit margin.
I kind of wish that was true because I know a lot of subscription devices that are grossly insecure. I think obviously the cost is a factor, and cost has to be borne somewhere in the supply chain. So, but I think the problem is that a lot of these vendors don't appreciate the threat environment as it is now. So, when I was designing products at Panasonic to do the security, we didn't have remote software updates and so on. Equally, the security research community wasn't as established as it is now. And so what you have now is, attackers up here. The mobile industry probably is up here in terms of defense. If you look at Android and iOS, that at least, they're very sophisticated in terms of defense. And then you've got Joe Blogg's washing machine company here, who's buying in, equipment from a third party in China that they don't know what it is, and it's insecure. So regulators are seeing this all the time, and, you as a consumer don't know. You can't measure really the difference. You can make some basic quality decision on a vendor that you think you know, but they could still be using an ODM supplier that's insecure too. So I think the reality is if you want to play in this game and sell products to people, you have to secure by design. Gone are the days where you can ship crap.
Yeah. Looks like we have time for one more if it's very fast.
Yes.
So was just going to ask, where did you decide to form your buckets from for the mapping? And then also, these are guideline documents. Is the level of granularity such that, the recommendations are so large, you could be in compliance without being technically compliant?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that leads into a point that was kind of part of the design requirements for these documents. was we wanted the things that were in them. I zoomed in a little bit, so maybe you could read. I don't know how good that screen is, but we wanted the things that we came up with to be objective, not like a, based on my sense of the feeling of the direction of the winds, I kind of think that you're okay here. But like, no, you either are this or you're not this, right? So objective, observable. So it didn't take, some deep peering into the source code of a compiled binary to be able to understand whether or not something was or wasn't, did or didn't meet these objectives. We wanted it to be something that could be falsifiable, verifiable. So that's an important part of science and the scientific method. I personally would love to see a lot more sciencey stuff done rather than vendor white papers that tout claims. Let's have scientific methods that actually run through things, tell you the methodology, make it repeatable, have other people who can go in and fact check your studies. So those were just three of the elements and requirements. And we wanted it to be high level enough and written in a language sufficient so that policymakers could get it. So it didn't take a huge leap. You might have had to educate them what email was, going back to Travis's talk earlier. But for those who already knew what email was, it wasn't a stretch that they would know that the thing is updatable, that it is supported for a defined lifetime, like something like that. And then it would have a clear translation into the more technical pieces. And you can argue about whether or not the firmware needs to be supported or just the software sitting on top of it. But the act of requiring that discussion to happen is a whole nother conversation that we're not even having right now. And then kind of the final point is, especially for the I Am The Cavalry Hippocratic Oath and the Automotive 5-star, we wanted it to be an attestation-based model so that manufacturers would tell you the commitments that they have made. Then that sets up a whole other enforcement regime that we don't have to worry about. Being just like a bunch of scrappy researchers who threw a bunch of ideas out. We didn't have any power or authority to enforce things. David does. Thank you. Good job. Way to hack the system. But so if people attest to something, then they've made a claim, right? And that should be something that bolsters public confidence. But if they're lying or if they're misleading, then there are remedies that already exist in the American system and the UK system and in other systems to be able to handle those types of things. So those were some of the design requirements that we had with the original system, and this maps really well. You could use it for that same thing.
Just to your point about the high level nature of the guidance, I think there's always a balancing act, right? Nothing's ever black and white. And so the last thing we wanted to do was constrain innovation. So you don't really want a monoculture of government tells you have to design this thing this particular way, because that's going to be bad. I don't want the Internet of Things to die. I actually want it to grow, but in a responsible way for users around privacy and security. So, there has to be some balance in that. But I think we've picked some of the things that we can say we don't want, right? And we can identify some of the bad things.
All right, well, we'll have to call it there. Please find these gentlemen and ask them more questions as you find them in the hallways. Thank you very much, and I believe that's the end of the video.
Awesome. Thank you.